Hey everyone, this is Jay from FI Fighter. I am pleased to be joined here today with Mark Arnesen and Adam Smits of Nzuri Copper. Mark is the CEO and Adam is the Chief Operating Officer. Thank you guys for joining me today.
Pleasure, Jay.
Pleasure, Jay. Morning.
To get started, can you guys briefly go over the history of Nzuri Copper?
Okay. Jay, look, Nzuri's been around for quite a while. Started off as Regal, ASX listed, and had a couple of assets or potential assets in Australia, and more recently a gold joint venture in the DRC. I got involved at the request of Tembo in January 2016, and really they got me involved with a view to, recapitalising the company and restructuring and sorting out some of the legacy issues. We did at that stage, we had a small dispute in respect to the gold JV. The company needed to be refinanced, and I think more importantly, the ownership of Kalongwe was fairly confused with, from a high level point of view, Regal owning some 30% of Kalongwe, Traxxas some 30%, GRCC, our Congolese partner, some 40%. And at that stage, we had been granted an exploitation license, which meant there's 5% that needed to be passed on to the DRC government as well. So 2016 was spent really restructuring the company, sorting out the ownership of Kalongwe, which, as it sits right now, GRCC has 10%. The DRC government, as required under the mining code, has 5%, and Nzuri has the balance, the remaining 85%. The company was recapitalised as well, with us carrying out a rights issue, and at this point in time, the company has no debt. And we have a cash balance which will get us through our initial requirements right now, which is complete the feasibility study and the first leg of our exploration.
The mainstream media recently published an article and it mentioned Nzuri Copper and the Kalongwe deposit, unfortunately in less than a favorable light. The concern here was regarding uranium and whether or not it is an impurity at the deposit that could affect the grades of the copper concentrate that's produced. Can you comment on that and uranium as a whole, and whether or not it's an issue that investors should be concerned with?
In the 30s, the 40s, and late 50s, and in all cases they were chasing uranium, and in all cases they walked away and said it was uneconomic. And this was, it's well known. And Kalongwe's not alone in the Congo. There's plenty of other sites that were looked at for uranium, and our geological consultants indicated that 9 out of 12 mines in the Kolwezi region have uranium in the deposits as well. So it's a fairly common occurrence in the Congo to have uranium associated with the copper mineralogy. In terms of what we're doing, we have two issues, I think. I guess you wouldn't call them issues, but we have two uranium fronts. We have some waste from that historical mining activities that we're going to clay or laterite encapsulate and bury and treat as what is called by the International Atomic Agency very low-level waste, and there's a process for dealing with that, and we're going to get government approval for that. And we don't see any issues given the two surveys that have been historically performed. I think one by Ivanhoe and one by Regal, the previous incarnation of Nzuri. There is also a pocket of higher level uranium around 300 ppm within the ore body, and we're treating that in terms of the mine plan. So we've allowed to blend that into the ore, and hence the concentrate, to achieve a level below legal limits, which are about 80 ppm in the Congo. So we're targeting around 60 ppm uranium in the ore for a portion, of the mine life when we go through that zone. So we don't believe uranium is a major issue. We've also tested all the concentrates that we've produced from a sort of 2-year test program, and most of the levels are around 20 ppm, which are pretty close to background levels.
Yeah, it sounds great, guys, and thank you so much for your time and for clarifying a lot of these key points, especially the uranium one. I think that's going to ease a lot of concerns that investors had, because for a while in hot copper, a lot of people were kind of wondering and speculating, because when you're just a retail investor, you only know what you hear, and people are wondering how come the company's not explicitly stating uranium in the corporate slides and those things of that nature.
Yeah, I guess we think it's a non-event. I think is the best way.
Yeah,
that's. Don't read anything into that omission. It's never ever been any intention by the company to be sort of intentionally silent on that. It's just been, I guess, always known, and obviously now in hindsight, wrongly. But because it has been in the public domain, I mean, you can Google Kalongwe uranium and you will find historical data about it. We've just progressed because it hasn't impacted on us. But obviously now, because of what has happened or transpired, when we put out the results of the feasibility study, we will quite specifically mention just what is required, from a treatment and mining point of view.
Can you guys comment on the mining laws in Congo? Recently in the news, there's been a lot of talk with Tanzania and how they kind of reformed those laws there, and a lot of the miners, especially the gold miners there, have kind of suffered as a consequence. So what's that like in Congo?
Look, Jay, there has been talk about reform of the mining laws, and certainly the Chamber of Mines in the Congo has been sort of, I guess, vociferous is the correct word, but in supporting the industry's case. And to be quite frank, I think Randgold and Mark Bristow is doing a superb job as well, putting forward the industry's position. And we certainly, and sorry, when I say we, it's the royal we, the industry, appears to get a good audience. So I guess really we're still awaiting the outcome, but cautiously optimistic. The DRC has gone through this before. They had a mining review many years ago, and their current code has had a lot of input. So I would like to think that if there are any changes, that they are changes that the industry as a whole has supported, and so is the Chamber. But, with all these things, it's watch this space. But, I think, what I'd like to say is the industry is well represented.
So one of the key highlights and attractions to the Nzuri Copper story is you guys are operating in a region where there's a lot of major players in the copper cobalt space. So in regards to existing infrastructure, can you comment on kind of the road access, power, and logistics?
Adam, I'll leave that totally up to you, obviously.
Okay. Well, we are about 77 kilometres from Kolwezi. And of that, we intend to leverage off Ivanhoe's roads, which have gone in the last few years. So between when the project was first looked at and the scoping study went out back in 2015 and today, there's been a fair bit of infrastructure put in by Ivanhoe for Kamoa and Kukula. And we are intending to piggyback off that a little bit, plus build it's around 28, 29 kilometre new access road to the site for concentrate export, and obviously to build the project. And we've put an environmental application in at the moment, so we're just waiting for that to get approved, and then we will start building as much of that road as we can before the wet season kicks in November. In terms of power infrastructure, the nearest power line that isn't owned by Ivanhoe is in Kolwezi, so that's some 70 k's away, or 45 k's as the crow flies. Obviously, Ivanhoe is busy doing their feasibility study, and have already started putting in some smaller power lines. They have a 120 and I think a 220 kVA line planned to go in the next 2 years, subject to project approval. So that would potentially bring power within about 15 k's of the site. And we've I guess had some initial discussions with Ivanhoe about that. And there's been no negativity around us potentially line or joining in with that line. I think the bigger issue in the Congo, which is well reported, is getting access to a power quota, and it typically takes sort of 18 months to 2 years. So if we were to do more than we're planning, which is a DMS circuit, in other words, if we were to put an SXEW in, that would be in 2 to 3 years' time. That would fall within the band of Ivanhoe building their line and giving us time to negotiate a power quota. In terms of the initial plant that we are building, which is what the feasibility study is based on, it's a dense media plant. Power consumption is relatively low compared to an SXEW. So to put that in perspective, a typical SXEW would probably run around, say, 8 megawatts of power requirements to do the sort of 20,000 tonnes of copper per year. We're looking in the 1.5 megawatts for the DMS plant. So much lower, and we're banking on using diesel with a solar hybrid option just to drag the unit cost down. It pulls the unit cost down about 10% using the solar hybrid option.
Would you say one of the main appeals with Nzuri Copper compared to a lot of its peers is the relatively modest capex? I know the scoping study came out a few years ago. Can you comment on basically the progression from then till now for the DFS in terms of capital costs?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is we've looked at contract versus owner mining. We went out on an EOI for contract mining in the region. The prices are much higher than we expected. And that's made us go back and have a look at owner mining, which is the model that'll be feeding in, I think, to the feasibility study, just purely on a unit cost basis. But obviously owner mining has a capital cost associated with it. So that's a step change. And then I think from the scoping study, there was a couple of infrastructure items that weren't really accounted for, one of them being the nearby stream/river that sort of runs near the pit. That needs to be diverted as part of the works as well. So they would probably be the two biggest step changes, I would guess, from the scoping study.
But Jay, just I think to add to that, it has been a bit of a swings and roundabouts. And as Adam alluded to, the fact that Ivanhoe has put in infrastructure has obviously assisted us as well. So it hasn't all been one-way negative traffic or bad traffic. It's been swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, and I think that's fair comment. That's probably saved sort of 5 million, but then there's money has gone elsewhere. But definitely there's been some upside with the work that Ivan have done, no question. There's also some additional work happening just outside of Kolwezi as well that Glencore are doing, which is beneficial. So again, on the roads.
Okay. In terms of the finished product that gets produced, listeners and even myself and people who are not so familiar with how everything is tied together at the end, the copper concentrate that you produce is also, it's linked to the finished and final cobalt product, or are they separate entities?
Look, we're producing a concentrate. So from a layman's perspective, it's basically looks like 12 mil gravel. And that gravel contains 20% concentrate in terms of a copper concentrate. And it varies by life of mine, but you could say for the sort of first 4 years, sort of 1.5 to just over 2%, 2.5% cobalt, and it's contained within the gravel. So any recovery of the copper or the cobalt happens at the customer's end. So they, in terms of an SXEW, they'll make cathode copper, and most of the plants in the DRC that we're aware of, and certainly I guess the end user that we're sort of honed in on, will make a hydroxide as opposed to a metal or anything else. But we don't produce a cobalt product as such, and we don't produce a copper product as such. We produce a concentrate that is a feedstock for the production of copper and cobalt.
Would there be any interest to go down that processing route? Is there any upside potential to tap into with perhaps building that type of plant on site?
Look, the feasibility study will be based on getting the concentrate to Lubumbashi, so over 300 k's away. So purely from a logistical point of view, because obviously trucking is a huge cost. It's a big proportion of our operating costs. Anything that's closer to site has a big benefit. And then the other thing is, obviously, there's quite a cost associated with converting your concentrate into cathode and into whatever cobalt end product you might be looking at. So as Adam said earlier, right now from a power point of view, we would be chasing a power allocation if it was something we did decide to progress. But certainly we've taken all the samples and we will be progressing. And, it's not saying it's something we're going to do, but we will be progressing with further test work just to see if there's something we should be looking at on a longer term basis.
Yeah, and I think just jumping in there, all of the waste streams that we produce from the DMS plant, there's still fairly good grades of copper and cobalt in them just because of the way the DMS works. It's a fairly rough recovery process. It's cheap, it's relatively simple, and the recoveries as a result of that are a lot lower than, say, you would get, an SX-EW maybe is 95% recovery, whereas the DMS is closer to 60. So there's a percentage of the copper and the cobalt that doesn't get recovered. We are stockpiling all of those streams, if you like, and there's a sand stream and a gravel stream. We're stockpiling those separate to come back and look at, as Mark indicated there, future either in situ, tank leach, other options in the future. And we've collected some sample in the first half of this year, about 3.5 tonnes of sample to do that future test work, mainly focused on leaching, but also different DMS head feed grades that are tied to sort of pit shells. There's also a stream of, it's classified as waste because it won't fall in the reserve, but there's a stream of ore that comes out of the pit, which is basically cobalt only, and that will be stockpiled separately again for future processing via a leaching method, I would say.
So I think, Jay, the answer to your question is very much there's a lot of upside in being able to process concentrate closer to sites in whatever form that takes. A third party putting up a SX-EW/cobalt plant in Kolwezi, or an initiative by us, or some kind of combination of the two. And we obviously are and will progress that, but it's at this stage it's very, very much early days. We've got a feasibility study which right now is based on HMS, and that's the first point of our focus. The second point is obviously the ongoing exploration program that we're running right now.
Okay. So it's really tough for investors to locate a primary cobalt speculation or stock to invest in. How would you say the sensitivity for Nzuri stacks up in terms of the revenue stream from copper versus cobalt?
Okay, well, look, I'm going to ask Adam to answer that. But the first thing, obviously, Jay, it's very dependent on the cobalt price you put in right now. As you would expect, that leverage is quite extreme. But suffice to say, at a price, we become a cobalt producer, well, certainly 50-50 from a revenue or turnover point of view. But Adam, do you want to?
Yeah, I think earlier in the year, without quoting any firm figures or otherwise, I think cobalt was sort of contributing 25-30% to the income stream. It's obviously a bit higher now because the price has gone from sort of mid-30s up to mid-50s. So, you can draw a line between that. But, we're comfortably high 30s, early 40s now in terms of cobalt contributing to the overall revenue stream as it sits today.
And that's at, just to clarify, that's at, let's say, a copper price about $3 spot and cobalt around $25 to $26?
That price is a bit lower than that. We're not using prices of the day, I guess, for our base case in the fee study. I think would be the best way to describe that.
And then I think the other thing as well, Jay, as Adam mentioned, we will have cobalt only ore which is stockpiled. At this stage, obviously, we will start looking at what we should or what we could sensibly do with that as well. It hasn't been part of the process yet.
So in terms of valuation, from my own research, I can see that for the amount of contained cobalt that you guys have and the grade of it, your market cap appears to be a lot cheaper than a lot of your peers, especially those in Canada. Is there anything you can comment on that, or any thoughts about listing on the TSXV?
Jay, yes, and I mean, you will see Adam put in a chart in our latest presentation, just I guess in effect giving some kind of cobalt comparison amongst our peer group. I wouldn't like it if someone called us deficient in respect of marketing our cobalt. It's just been part of the process. When the scoping study was originally done, it didn't include anything in respect of cobalt. Cobalt was just identified as an upside. We've obviously progressed it. The feasibility study will contain cobalt, and we have been out and spoken to sort of SXEW plants in the area to confirm that they will give us credit, and we do have indicative quotes in respect of what we can get. So look, the whole cobalt side of Nzuri is something we will be and actually are progressing right now. I would like to think that in respect of cobalt, it represents a good point early, and it's obviously something we must progress and will progress, and are looking at ways right now that we can progress it. But I guess it's really one thing at a time. And yes, we didn't. Kalongwe started off as a copper producer. The scoping study was done on that basis. There wasn't any specific reason that the cobalt was left out of the scoping study that I can gather. Remember, Adam and I were involved in the scoping study. Although, having said that, the cobalt market has obviously changed somewhat, and the payability, in other words, the grade of cobalt in concentrate, has moved substantially in our favour. I don't think that's purely just because of the cobalt price. I think it's also a case of speaking more seriously to plants in the area in respect to the cobalt we will have in our concentrates or have in our concentrates. So look, I'm answering your question in a very roundabout way, and I'm not intentionally trying to do that. I'm battling for the best way to answer it. But no, look, we're very enthused about the amounts of cobalt that we do have right now. As you would have seen, the grades are really, really good. And it's an upside we need to aggressively address, and we will.
And Kalongwe is a really exciting development project. You guys have a DFS that's due in the short term, but you also have exciting exploration potential, and that's something I think investors might overlook. And you have a joint venture with Ivanhoe Mines. Can you guys briefly comment on the exploration potential and the land package that you're sitting on?
Yeah, look, Jay, if you look at Kalongwe itself, Kalongwe, the land mass is about 8 square Ks. So it's relatively small. The joint venture with Ivanhoe, which is an earn-in, that covers about another 340 square Ks. So it gives us a nice land mass, and it's all contiguous, which helps. Under the joint venture, we can go up to some 98%, and Ivanhoe has various clawback rights as well, which I won't go through in detail. They're well spelt out in our announcements on the website. We've got a South African company, MSA, involved. They're acting as our exploration manager, and look, to date, they've done a great job for us. I think one of the benefits of using a consulting organisation like that is we don't suffer from rotation. They ensure that we've consistently got someone from MSA on site, which has really helped us. And then plus they bring along their infrastructure as well, from a systems point of view. So they started October last year. I guess because given the way things had gone with Regal, we had slowed down quite a bit. I really wanted it to be seen that we were back and we were in action. We hadn't just died and gone away. So we started some drilling in October at Kambuji. The reason we went to Kambuji at that stage, it wasn't our first target, but it was the only place we could access during the wet season. And we drilled which we could, which, best of my recollection, was we managed to put down 5 holes. I don't have the release open. And a fairly successful campaign. I guess it really proved the principle that what we were finding on surface tended to carry on at depth. And then obviously for the wet season we had to stop. So the drilling campaign came to an end. Certainly groundwork carried on and we continued with the camp. And then we started drilling again in roughly April. And look, that progresses. We've been left with quite a few targets from the work that Ivanhoe did and the data that they've left us with. And then over and above that, we will hopefully, well, I'm pretty sure we'll identify our own targets as well. We should be carrying out an aeromag. I would hope. Look, Jay, it's always hard with permitting, but I'd like to think we get the permitting in place shortly, but say September. And I guess really our intentions are to ensure that come the wet season, our whole program isn't shut like it was last year. So we have put in access tracks to enable us to access Kateti down to the south and Kakangazi out to the west and Monwezi just to the west of us. Like I say, with a view to ensuring that we can be active throughout the wet season as well. So yes, if you look at Polongwe, that was always one of the issues. It's a short life. The scoping study had a life of just over 5 years. So the two upsides we've got, the one is doing something further to extend the life of Polongwe. And there's a variety of ways that could be potentially done, and one of them is obviously on the leaching side that Adam alluded to earlier. And the other is obviously exploration success. Polongwe, if nothing else, pays for a lot of plants and a lot of infrastructure. And we believe we've got a prospective landmass as well, which we've only just started exploring. So, yeah, cautiously optimistic in respect to the potential there as well. But obviously we need to get this aeromag done and out the way. We are drilling as we speak. We've got a diamond drill rig turning and an RC rig turning as we speak.
Okay, and the last question that I had is regards to financing and... sorry, there's some background noise.
No problem, okay?
The last question I had is in regards to financing and the path to production.
Yeah, look, Jay, we've gone through and sort of discussed the potential capex. We haven't put out a figure yet. If you start looking at any kind of project financing on a figure that's small, it starts becoming a bit problematic. It's actually too small to whet the appetite of a lot of the financiers. We had a lot of discussions at the whole sort of Cape Town season, with Arlington 121 and Indaba, speaking to a couple of the agencies and a couple of the commercial banks. While there is some appetite, albeit slightly reduced for the DRC, what does destroy the appetite is a relatively small size. So, we had initially, and when people have asked us, the standard response has been, look, let's call this phase one of the project. We would be looking at equity, on the assumption that capex is sort of, some 40 to 50 odd million. And I guess that has really been our stance to date. However, having said that, it doesn't mean we're ignoring other forms of funding. We are speaking to debt providers, I think, as people would expect, and there may be potential for some kind of streaming as well. When I say I don't know, I mean, we've obviously been having discussions. I think where we are right now, Jay, the first thing is we need to get the feasibility out. Once we have the feasibility out, obviously with that comes a reserve, which assists us no end in the figures we can publish. Once we've got the reserve and the results out, we will embark on a process of I've got to be careful in my choice of words here, because the feasibility study will be exceptionally well done. But once the feasibility study is out, we can start identifying the various upsides that we've got as well. And, some of the upsides we've already alluded to. We will, I think, all our base case assumptions will tend to be fairly conservative in respect of what we can get from or get for our products. We haven't started any kind of negotiating process, and obviously there is room for negotiation. And hopefully from a structural point of view, there will be potential improvements as well. So all of that will then be addressed, and I would imagine with that we will start expanding some of the potential sources of financing as well. But I guess, just as our base case right now for the feasibility study has been sort of fairly conservative in all our parameters, so has the funding assumption, where the funding assumption has really been, look, from a CapEx point of view, this isn't very large right now. Let's look at equity. However, in saying that, we are and we will see what can sensibly be done in respect of other forms of financing.
Mark, Adam, thank you so much for your time and for joining me today. If investors want to learn more about Nzuri Copper, how can they find out more?
Jay, we really are doing our level best to keep our website fully updated. And I'd like to think we're continually enhancing it as well. And look, both Adam and I are always available for a chat.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you guys so much.